The government promised hugs, not bullets. But the catastrophic result was a record level of bloodshed.
It's just a shocking outcome. It allowed criminal organizations to become, well, the de facto rulers of Mexico.
And that cements what you could really argue is a profound crisis of state sovereignty.
That phrase, abrazos, no balazos, it really captures a tragic irony, doesn't it? A policy that was supposed to bring peace, to demilitarize security.
And it did the exact opposite.
The complete opposite. It institutionalized military control and at the same time basically handed over territory and economic control to the very criminal groups it was meant to stop.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today is a rigorous analysis of this spectacular failure of public security in Mexico. We're focusing on the strategy, or maybe the lack of one, from former President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, or AMLO.
We're diving deep into sources that detail this paradoxical shift toward militarization, this strange modus vivendi that emerged between the state and criminal groups.
And how the cartels used this whole period not to shrink, but to consolidate power and, expand their economic empires.
And to really grasp the scale of this crisis, we have to start with a defining moment, a moment of violence that really got the world's attention, the November 2019 massacre.
This incident was just horrific. We're talking about the ambush and killing of 9 dual U.S.-Mexican citizens, 3 women and 6 children.
From the LeBaron and Langford families.
And they were shot and then burned alive by cartel gunmen in broad daylight.
The group allegedly responsible was La Línea, which is the armed wing of the Juarez cartel. And this wasn't, some isolated crime. It was an act of brazen, large-scale violence that just perfectly showed how the Mexican state couldn't protect its own citizens.
And that brutality. It prompted then President Trump to publicly call for the U.S. to help Mexico wage war on the drug cartels and wipe them off the face of the earth.
It really laid bare the frustration on both sides of the border.
Which brings us to our core question for this deep dive. How did an administration that promised a non-confrontational, peaceful strategy,
one that said it would prioritize the root causes of crime,
how did it end up presiding over Mexico's deadliest presidential term in history? The dissonance is just stunning.
It really is.
Okay, so let's unpack the core philosophy. AMLO campaigned relentlessly on abandoning the old security approach.
Yeah.
That approach from his predecessors. It was the very public, military-led kingpin strategy.
Right, targeting the high-value cartel leaders. And to be fair, most experts agree that strategy didn't really work.
It just splintered the cartel.
Exactly. It decentralized their power, caused them to break into smaller, more aggressive factions, and that just fueled even more violence.
So the whole idea behind abrazos, no balazos, was to stop poking the beehive, basically. Use social programs, address poverty, and avoid these bloody fights.
That was the theory. But if that was the plan, why did crime immediately surge so catastrophically?
That's the question.
Well, the sources show that while the old strategy was dropped, the new government didn't seem to have a clear, concrete alternative. I mean, social programs are a long-term solution. You need a day-to-day security plan.
They created a vacuum.
A total vacuum. And the result is horrifying. AMLO's 6-year term registered over 199,000 homicides.
199,000.
It's a devastating record for a single administration. By the end of just 2019, they were already on track for more than 35,000 homicides in that year alone.
That number is just staggering. It confirms the scale of the failure. But here's the real paradox. After campaigning against militarization, AMLO does a complete U-turn. He ends up relying on the military more than any leader before him.
His argument was that civilian police forces were just too corrupt, institutionally broken. He said they were unfit to fight these heavily armed criminal groups and that, well, only the armed forces had the discipline and the firepower.
So because the civilian institutions were broken, he had no choice but to double down on the military.
The very institution he previously blamed for destabilizing the country.
But wait, if corruption was the problem, doesn't shifting all that power to an opaque military apparatus just concentrate the risk in an even less transparent place?
That's the critical flaw in the logic, and it's exactly what happened. The reliance on the military became unprecedented. He deployed close to 300,000 National Guard, Army, and Navy officers for crime-fighting duties.
300,000. That number is huge. It surpasses the entire civilian police force, doesn't it?
It does. And the National Guard, which was supposed to be the centerpiece of this new strategy.
It was meant to be a civilian force, right?
Nominally, yes. But In practice, it just functions as another branch of the armed forces. It's led by military commanders, its personnel are mostly soldiers. It was basically folded under the defense ministry.
So the military's footprint just expanded everywhere.
Exponentially. Across policing, ports, airports, customs, the entire fabric of Mexican governance.
Okay, so we have a record number of coups on the streets, but the violence continues and the cartels are getting stronger. Why didn't all those troops crush them? This is where that modus vivendi comes in, the live and let live deal.
It's the key piece of the puzzle. You have this massive deployment, but no clear mandate to actually fight the cartels head-on because that would violate the abrazos philosophy.
So it's a contradiction.
A huge one. And so commanders on the ground, they forge this uneasy coexistence with the criminal groups.
What does that deal actually look like? What are the rules?
The sources say the rule is simple. The military won't intervene aggressively in cartel business as long as the cartels curb the overt displays of violence, the kind of violence that forces a political reaction.
Just keep it quiet, basically.
Exactly. As one criminal leader put it, you can't make too much noise, and you can't make the government look bad.
That sounds less like a peace strategy and more like, I don't know, conflict management. Avoid the bad headlines.
It allowed the administration to point to tiny statistical dips in murder rates and claim success, while the actual criminal power structures were growing stronger. But this deal had a horrifying consequence.
The violence didn't stop.
It just went underground.
And that's where the human cost becomes even more devastating. How did it go underground?
It created an incentive for criminal groups to hide their victims. They started using clandestine graves to avoid backlash from the state, to keep the murders off the official books.
So the state manages the crime stats by having fewer public murder scenes, but people are still dying. They're just disappearing.
And the numbers on disappearances are heartbreaking. They have soared in this period. About 65% of all registered disappearance cases in Mexico's history. That's over 116,000 people.
65% of them happened since 2019.
Since 2019. It creates this illusion of a dip in murder rates, while the true death toll from hidden bodies and missing persons is near historic highs.
So the cartels get this period of military restraint, a state focused on long-term causes, and what do they do at that time?
They fatten up, to use the criminal slang. This period was a massive advantage for them. They expanded their economic reach, they strengthened their organizations, all without much fear of the military taking them down.
And this allowed them to diversify way beyond just drug trafficking.
Oh, absolutely. They're acting less like smugglers now and more like, as you said, predatory economic regulators.
What does that mean in practice?
Well, extortion rackets hit their highest recorded rates. But it's more sophisticated than that. They're seizing control of entire supply chains for basic goods.
Not just demanding protection money.
No, it's more than that. They're taking over everything from transport hubs to setting prices on things like tortillas, eggs, and meat. They're replacing the state as the economic authority in some regions.
So they're forcing, say, an avocado farmer to pay them just to operate, and then also forcing them to sell through cartel-approved channels.
Precisely. They integrate themselves right into the legal economy. And one source even noted that exploiting legal businesses like avocados is less problematic because it draws less heat from the authorities than drug trafficking.
More profit, less risk. And this whole strategy has a direct, devastating impact here in the U.S. We have to talk about fentanyl.
This is the critical security link for you, the listener. Mexico has become the primary producer and supplier of illicit fentanyl to the American market. The cartels are perfectly positioned to maximize profits.
Because it's a synthetic opioid. It's cheap to make.
Very cheap. Just 2 milligrams can be lethal. They produce it in small, portable labs with precursor chemicals from Asia. It's completely changed the drug trade.
They don't need to ship huge volumes of marijuana or cocaine anymore. They can move tiny amounts of fentanyl for massive profit.
And their consolidated, diversified structure makes them incredibly efficient at it. It's a vicious cycle. Military restraint allows for consolidation, which funds more corruption, which creates a more efficient supply chain for deadly drugs flowing into the U.S.
And none of this would be possible without the complete collapse of the civilian justice system. That's the final piece here, isn't it? The impunity crisis.
The state just completely failed to develop the civilian law enforcement needed to actually prosecute crime. The whole system, police, prosecutors, underfunded, unprepared, and hopelessly corruptible.
Give us the numbers on impunity. Because they're just unbelievable.
The impunity rate for murder nationwide reached 95.7% in 2022.
Let that sink in. Less than a 5% chance that a murderer will face justice.
And for all crimes nationwide, judicial impunity reached 96.3% in 2022.
If almost 97% of crimes go unpunished, what is the point of the system? Those numbers confirm the rule of law basically doesn't exist for most violent crime in Mexico. There's no deterrent.
None. So the cartels just use their old strategy of silver or lead bribes or bullets, plata, plomo. When the chance of being prosecuted is so low, it's a good investment to just bribe the few officials who might get in your way.
And that corruption is spread to the very military forces that AMLO is relying on to fix the problem.
Completely. The whole premise was that the military was the incorruptible alternative. But the sources show military officers have been allegedly involved in selling protection and weapons to criminal groups.
So it didn't solve corruption, it just concentrated the risk.
Exactly. It's a crisis of institutional integrity. What we've seen is that this isn't just about drug trafficking anymore. It's a crisis of state sovereignty, where criminal groups have been allowed to expand their power in exchange for, hiding the violence.
The state failed on every front. Failed to address root causes, failed to dismantle the criminal enterprise, and failed to build up capable civilian institutions.
And so now the next government faces a nearly impossible choice, a real catch-22.
What is that choice?
They can either continue relying on a military that's proven ineffective and is implicated in corruption, or they can risk sudden, massive destabilization by pulling those troops out of regions where the cartels are now the de facto government.
The state is trapped in a maze of its own making.
That's right. When the system is this broken, the cartels become a shadow government. They run local economies, they provide their own version of security.
Which leaves us with a final question for you to consider. When the legitimate state completely fails to provide security and the rule of law, who steps in to fill that vacuum? And at what cost to a democratic society?
Because right now the answer seems to be the criminal cartels, and the cost is measured in nearly 200,000 lost lives and the total collapse of justice.
That is something truly devastating to mull over as we wrap up this deep dive.